Hey, it's Wednesday and it's time for another Business Analysis Live. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Susan Moore. I am the Community Engagement Manager with the International Institute of Business Analysis. We don't just talk about business analysis here, we also talk a lot about adjacent skills, things about business analysis that maybe you don't think have a direct relationship, but impact the way that you perform the work that you do. You see what I did there? Let me tell you about your voice. When you are thinking about getting ready to talk with your stakeholders or having workshops or getting ready to communicate with someone, you probably think about the logistics. Have I reserved the room? Do I have the right people on the invitation? Do I know what the purpose of the meeting is? Do you think about your voice? Do you think about how using that instrument can help to convey calm authority or how it might hurt you? Maybe you haven't, but maybe you should, because sometimes some of those stakeholder issues we have can be remedied by a really good awareness and use of our voice. And for that, I am super excited today to introduce a guest who is an educator on voice and an opera singer, and we're going to ask him about that. So I want to welcome to the stage Elias Mokole. Hey,
Hello.
Elias.
Well, you've just done my whole talk. There you go. I don't
Oh,
see you later.
I feel like you've got a lot more to offer today.
Well, it's the broad strokes are the not the challenge, right? The individualization of each of these skills because everybody processes those things a bit differently. Now, as you said, I'm an opera singer, and I've done about 800 performances across the globe for a number of years, and it doesn't matter every time the downbeat happens. It doesn't matter what we've prepared or what we haven't prepared. It's what we do at the moment, and sort of the skills can help you when other things hijack it, like you were talking about inner challenges, right? So
Yeah.
when I went to go prepare for this, and I did an Instagram post, I found the power of the voice, the graphic. I found a
Mhm.
wonderful recording of a famous singer, one of my favorites, named Leontine Price.
Hmm.
And I thought, okay, she's got this refined skill set that I know from hearing her talk that she's worked on. But she is able to communicate this in a way that connects to anyone who's listening. And it makes me think of my experience with you in May,
Mhm.
talking about the Babok and all of the information that a BA has to assimilate to get a certification.
Yes.
It's about assimilating that in front of a stakeholder in the same way that connects to them, because we can't give them everything. And so that's basically who I am, and what I've been able to do is take the skills that I've gotten as an educator and a performer and realize that the outcome for a BA is different, but there are core skills that we can all practice, that I still practice, that it isn't
Yes.
just, oh, I think about breath. Now I'm done. Let's move on to the next thing. Anyway,
Right.
that's my sort of preamble.
Now, so you mentioned you and I got to meet at BA and Beyond in Copenhagen. So you did a keynote in Copenhagen, and then you did a keynote in Utrecht as well.
I did an espresso. I
You
did a
did.
short
Oh, that's
talk,
right.
which was great because I learned from my keynote. Because the audience was different, right? So I
Yeah.
changed that because the energy of the folks in Copenhagen was very different from the energy of those in Utrecht. So
Yes. Yes. Well, so that's where and by the way, Philip Hendricks, who organizes that conference, I'm sure there was a team of folks, but they did such a great job in bringing you because you did give us something different to think about. So first, I know that I've introduced you and you've kind of talked about your background. I don't know, do you want to add anything else about you before we dive into this conversation? As you can see, we've got some folks that are already
well, the
really
print is
excited
really,
about.
really small, so I'll have to trust you.
Oh, hey, let's see if I can make it bigger. This is a new feature that StreamYard has, and
Right?
I
So
haven't.
while you're doing that, the only thing is that that I grew up with parents that owned a restaurant, so that work ethic skill is something that helped me in my performance skill. I'm second generation Lebanese. And foreign languages were always something. Communication, words. I adore words, and I think I help people and myself take a breath and let myself listen to what they're saying. So that's really, I've got a thing called develop your authentic voice, and the whole thing about authenticity is each of us have a private, our own personal vibration, and that's how we interact with the world. So that's kind of who I am in a core, and I love to laugh, so that's good.
All right. I know we shared a lot of laughs. So, all right. So now let's talk about by the way, I tried to make that text a little bit bigger. Does that work? I guess I can make it really big.
Can you tell I'm doing this? Well, one of the advantages of wisdom and sage age is that you can go things like this, and they'll go, oh yeah, okay, cool. But yeah, I can see them mostly.
Excellent. All right. And so the title of today's talk, right? Listen, I totally stole your the name. You said your blog is developing your authentic voice, and so that's where the inspiration for today's episode title comes from. Um, so let's talk a little bit about voice, and why some of the tools that you have used as part of your opera singing, why they're important, and why we as business analysis professionals might be able how we might be able to benefit from some of those.
So if you understand an opera singer or someone who's teaching a course where we deal with um, we've said the same thing over and over again. Many of the opera texts have been around hundreds of years, or poetry. I also like Lieder, Schumann, Schubert, Brahms. These are texts by great poets. So I have to memorize the poem and then internalize it. So it doesn't sound like I'm just reciting a poem, that it becomes part of who I am. And there are several different ways I've managed to do that over the years, kinesthetically writing it out. With technology, there are all kinds of ways. With AI, I can have interesting conversations about the words and find immediately a way to do a nuance to a word, a color. And the color transfers to, how we vocalize something. And the whole idea about taking pauses and letting an idea land. In music, we're lucky because we have rests, and silence and music are about as important as the music. If anyone's listened to Beethoven Fifth, one understands the rests have as much power as the pa 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 pa. So these are core skills that I have adapted to teaching, to presenting, to helping others find what they sound like. Because the last thing I'll say about that is nowadays, with the proliferation of recordings, someone with a good voice as a singer can watch a master and imitate it. But that's external and that's of value. But finding ways to connect what you liked about a person and what you wanted to change about your voice means that you have to be self-aware and know what your skills are and what your strengths are, and then maybe what you want to enhance. And listening to oneself, Pavarotti, if you know who Luciano Pavarotti is, eh, one of the things that hit me is that every time he said he heard himself in the beginning, he cried, because we don't hear ourselves and we're critical. Right? It's
Yes.
very, even now, I mean, I recorded my session at BA and Beyond on my iPhone. I can't tell you how long it took me to listen to it, because, my imagination of, oh my God, Elias, did you say, oh my, that's what we do. That's the mind chatter.
Yeah.
But we have control to stop that. And a stakeholder or an audience member picks up on that negative mind chatter, even if they can't see it. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm talking to you and I'm thinking, oh my God, what's Susan going to say to me next? Oh no, am I going to say this? Is she going to ask? Then, and I can imagine when you're presenting to a stakeholder, you have lots of things you have to adapt with what they say.
Yes. Yeah. You've got to be able to, as you are hopefully listening to what they're saying, right? You've got to be able to adapt. And so sometimes that it can almost be an out of body experience because now I am inhabiting the space of, why did they say that like that? Are they mad? I don't know. Did I say something wrong? What happened? Blah, blah, blah. And so that happens to everybody, not just singers, not just business analysis professionals. So, if I were to kind of paraphrase, maybe step one in this is self awareness is probably the number one thing that we can bring to the table as we are thinking about how we want to speak to whatever audience, and to prepare ourselves for having that conversation. So being self-aware, I think, is one good area. What does that mean when you're work? What does that mean? I'm going to stop with the
Well, I
multiple
mean,
questions.
there are so many because that encompasses so many things, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, knowing your material is one thing, right? Of
Mm,
course. And then letting go of it once you're in the meeting and not trying to stick to your this is what I'm going to say. And you even if you imagine that a stakeholder is going to say this. Self-awareness is also about noticing how you're reacting to what's being said at the moment. The reason I was smiling when you were talking before is because it made me think there was a tenor who I won't mention. We always called him back to you. Because even if, like, you ask me a question like, Elias, tell me what you're about to do. And we could see with this particular guy that he was already not listening and thinking about his response to what you say.
mm,
And that's a very slippery, that's easy to do. So self awareness involves that. Sometimes we can record the best way with these smartphones. They're ubiquitous now. I mean, we've had mirrors forever to see what we look like, but now in casual ways we could record a texts, for a week, record what we sound like in a non-scripted way to just hear what the quality of our sound is and mostly what's good about it. That's what I help people do most because they tend to be hypercritical, and go, "Oh, I
yes.
hate listening to my voice," like we said about Pavarotti. I mean, that is a common response. My voice isn't high enough. It doesn't sound this enough. It doesn't sound that enough. Or I'm so good at it that I can just wing it, which is sometimes useful, but we're only as good as we are at the moment, that kind of a thing. So those things all play into awareness. And
Yeah.
it's sometimes that you need a guide because it's a lot.
Yeah, we before we got started today, we were talking about, well, how do you learn to be a good speaker? How do you learn to be a good singer? And you can train, and you likely might take courses, or in your case, right, you are training, you are giving vocal training, right, and coaching. But to get good, you have to practice. Like, you have to do it. There's not just, I'm going to read a whole lot and then one day I'm going to be great. And some of that practice means you've got to be able to listen to yourself. Now, I can remember my dad was in television when I was growing up. And so, one of the things, we got one of the very earliest VCRs. And so, it predated the remote control. So, little Susan was the start the recording, pause the recording, and all. I were my dad on television because every night when he came home, he would watch himself. So that watching himself is how he got good with interviewing people, his on camera presence, and he would not have improved any other way but for the fact that he would watch himself. So it's important.
It is. And when I think about the 45-minute keynote I had to do in Copenhagen, I had to sort of put everything into it. And I couldn't say everything. If I said everything, everybody would have been overloaded, right? And Philip
Right.
wanted it to be interactive, so it couldn't all be lecture. I can't tell you how many times I spoke it and practiced it in my head and then recorded it so I could hear what, what I thought maybe I wanted to say and what I didn't want to say. And, I've had a lifetime of this, and it doesn't matter how experienced you are, there's still value in that sort of self piece, self listening piece.
Yeah.
especially when it's not scripted, especially if you're not thinking, I am going to record now, because we do things with our instrument that might sound better. We have something that we used to call radio voice, right? An
Hmm.
announcer can sound really smooth and wonderful and performative and theatrical, but then you can't remember a single thing they've said after they're done because they've just, like those movie trailers.
Hmm.
We talked about this before, the idea of you don't have to be extroverted or performative to be understood. And one of our colleagues I spoke with after the BA and Beyond online talked about, what she called junior BAs, that they're not as experienced, they're not as comfortable with one-on-one intimate conversations because those are hard. and
Yes.
and it isn't because they don't have the skills, but they haven't done it that much, and they don't know what part of the pie that they need to maybe enhance, rather than, I can't speak very well, I'm shy, I don't really like to talk to people. And I get that, but I think most people, if they're introverted, still have, if they're in a position where they still have to communicate, can be equally or even more effective, as you talked about your own experience, where it makes you key in to each individual. And that's how you get authenticity.
Yes. Yeah. So, one of the things that you've said a couple of times, here's how I've interpreted is that one of the things that we can do for ourselves is to stop comparing ourselves to what we think is a great communicator, because it may not be in our skill set. It may be somebody who is very extroverted and totally okay being performative or theatrical on stage, and while that might get our attention, it might not be right for us. So, yeah, you and I were talking about, well, what about the introverts, right? Our profession is filled with them. And I feel like sometimes we do ourselves a disservice by saying, well, I'm an introvert. I can't really talk to people. Yeah, you can. You can. And so part of that is, how can you leverage that thing that introverts have, which is to have very deep conversations with one person? How can you leverage that um, to get the most out of your communication style? And I think you nailed it. Part of that lends itself to a certain authenticity that maybe people being over the top and theatrical, that they may not be able to get across.
It's like a recipe. I think of it like cooking, right? I mean, each of us has a core set of recipe ingredients of who we are, and it's about enhancing what we have rather than saying, I need to be more extroverted, I need to be more introverted. It's that both sets of people have skills and can be maximized to the most potential. But if we're not thinking about it, and we slip into judgmental terms, I'm to this or I'm to that. And one of the things, that mind chatter is a very important part when I would teach young students, or even myself. When you're getting ready to speak, you think, oh my God, am I going to remember all of this? What's going on? It's very, we can control what we think, but it takes some energy. And the greatest mentor I had, her name was Margaret Harshaw. She was credited as having the most roles sung at the Met. One of her things was, singing, and she transferred this to speaking, is 95% mental. We
Hmm.
will our voice to do what we wish it to do. But that being said, we have to know what, like AI, we have to know what commands. If we don't put the right commands in, we're not going to get the most efficient response. Anyway,
Yes. Yeah. Let me tell you something else. I think that I was telling you about a webinar, a really fun webinar that we did last week, and it was on working with stakeholders. And we had a panel of characters who were half dressed for Halloween, half like the stakeholders from like your nightmares. Um, and one of the things that the speaker, who's the Jamie Champagne, who's been a guest here and who's fantastic, one of the things that she said in her approach to this cast of characters was, your purpose needs to be fixed, but your methods are adaptable. And so that, like, I wrote that down because that meant, like, she nailed it with like just that. And I Yes, sir. I feel like you've got something to add.
Well, I mean, the reason I want to add is because I've got these four pillars, right?
Okay.
Intention, breath, tone, and connection. And that feeds
Yeah.
right into what Jamie was saying. If you have a clear intention when you're taking your breath, that changes how you take the breath and then how you use the tone as it vibrates over the vocal folds. And those natural vibrations are what connect you to whomever you're listening to, who's listening to you, right?
Mhm,
And so
mhm,
it's
mhm,
been around forever. There are just so many ways to express it. But one of the things that you and I talked about in addition to that is I got to, when I was out in, I think it was in Utrecht, because I had more time to be a part of things, and I was part of Lewis and Imtiaz's murder mystery. And one of the
mhm,
things when I've heard them talk about that, which is similar to what you said, Jamie, as you guys did, is that
mhm.
they created that because there was something they called death by PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And the fact that the tendency, and I even noticed it when when I was in Copenhagen, but I was just listening to a Stoic, modern Stoic week, and they had all these really intelligent academic speakers, but the tendency for them to read off it on a video, one-way video, was strong. And I didn't remember much, but there was one man who was soft-spoken, who wasn't really an extroverted personality by my estimate. And I wrote notes because he sort of internalized his message. He wasn't looking at notes. He wasn't looking at a prompter on a screen. And it takes that kind of intention, as Jamie said,
Mhm.
to then adapt and then
Yes.
trust, like you and I were talking about. We knew that this was going to go someplace interesting. Voila. Oh, je pas
Yeah.
I love
Well, and I think that's just it, because you also said that a good portion of it is about being prepared. And I know business analysis professionals in our audience today will feel that to their core. Like, we might over prepare, but then the problem becomes that we are so prepared that we don't let loose. That we And it's in that moment of, I know the topic. I know, I am confident in the skills. I know that I can handle it, and I'm just going to get in front of people, and I am going to be there in the moment with them, and where it goes, it goes. That takes confidence, I think.
And you build it by practicing it and believing in yourself. So
Mhm.
that sounds kind of, warm and touchy feely, and I believe it. But if you set up an iPad or some kind of device and just start, don't look directly into it, just start talking about what you might say, you gain confidence because you go, oh, some of that's pretty darn good, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't know, the fear of not knowing is pretty strong. I mean, that idea of faith, believing that you're going to be able to, please, I know this, you get in front of an orchestra, 500 people have paid lots of money, and the conductor goes like this, and you're like, okay, I worked on this. Is it going to come out tonight? Because it's only the moment that is the crucial part, right? And that's where I identify with the BA community is I over prepare, and I've had to and I've had to learn to go, you know what? Just we said this morning when you said technology was challenge, breathe. And breath is an amazing reset if we access that tool. I can't tell you how long I was a singer and learned about diaphragmatic breathing before I connected it to this kind of thing and realized that when we're nervous, the flight or freeze takes over and it
Yes.
causes high breathing, but we can reset it. That's the part that I forgot was that, oh, I know this if I'm aware that I'm doing, oh my God, inside, even if it doesn't show physically, that there are breath exercises. One I talk about in my blog is a guy by the name of Farinelli, who was a singer in the 16th century, who uses what now is called box breathing. They've adapted it, but basically it's practicing how much air pressure you need for an inhale, how much you release for an exhale, what you do when you suspend. And it can reset you in a way if you're anxious at all, even when you're about to deliver something. So,
Yes. I do so I do yoga, and I'm at the stage of my yoga life where I just want to do the one where you lay on the floor and breathe. I don't want to do all the stretchy bendy stuff.
Oh, good. Then I do yoga.
Yeah, yeah, I do yoga. That's what it looks like these days. And so, they are often trained in breath work. And, they talk a lot about when you do that deep breathing, one of the things it can do is it can stimulate the parasympathetic, which can help to calm you down. And in the moment, right, if you're dealing with a tense situation or something comes up that you didn't plan for and you start to feel, we all know what that feeling is. We may have a personal, it may look different, but for me, it's like my voice starts to go away. That's how I know I'm starting to have that moment. And I know in that moment I need to take a bit of silence, and I just need a good, full, deep breath. Um, and, I would encourage business analysis professionals understand what that thing is, what it feels like when you start feeling a little bit out of control, and then take that deep breath.
Breath has been talked about a lot in a certain way, but basically it's good to reduce that we're an instrument and how we create sound. It's good to think about that, not in a very analytical way, but the idea is that the air comes over the folds and creates a vibration, right? Like a reed for a clarinet. And a violin is the one that I equate most to singing because of the strings that they vibrate, and that's what
Mhm.
causes it. But breath is basically, if you're thinking about when you take in air, you're filling up the lungs, and then what other parts of your body react, not judging that, but noticing what reacts when you take a breath. Does your throat react? Does your chest come up? Do you think lower in your back muscles? And it's not about judgment of it, as I've heard so often in when you hear meditative when people lead meditations, they say, don't think, oh, this is wrong, I suck at this. Think, just notice what you're doing. And then once you notice it, you can decide for yourself or with someone like me or Jamie or you, is it the most efficient way? Are you getting across that intention? Is this going to be the most efficient way rather than I need to be more of this or more of that? So that's when you talk about self awareness, it comes back down. And the core is always breath. Margaret Harshaw said, problems with vocalism, like you losing your voice,
Mhm.
that kind of thing, come down to two things, she said: how we take the air and what we do with the air once we got it.
Mm.
Just those two. But you need an outside because they're so nuanced. It's helpful to have, but that's really because if we hold, like you're saying,
Yeah.
hold to your breath, it causes you, and a stakeholder may not consciously notice that, but on some level, they're going to notice that much more than if you said, oh, you didn't say exactly the right thing, which makes you more human. And they can go,
Right?
oh, good. Okay.
That we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, right? In order to communicate correctly. Yeah. And I feel like what happens is we lose that bit of humanity. So I have done here, I don't know, did I tell you? Maybe I don't know if I told you this. So a million years ago when I was a kid, I had a speech impediment. In fact, I still have a little bit of it, but um, I did a lot of work with a speech therapist when I was a kid. And every once in a while, when I start talking real fast, you can kind of hear it. Um, but I got used to speaking in front of people. And now I've completely forgotten where I'm going with this.
Well,
But
it'll.
but I think that exercise of feeling like I'm not a good speaker, and then and knowing that I'm working with a speech therapist, so clearly I've got an issue. By the way, I was like 6 or 7. Um, but that having to speak in front of somebody just got me out of my head, because I was doing that speaking in front of somebody that was going to help me and who was going to guide me and who wanted the best for me. And so that thinking about getting caught up in the what we aren't doing correctly, what we aren't saying that's correct can be a lot of pressure on us. When really, if we just, I know what I know, and I'm going to communicate it to you. And if it sounds weird, let's have a laugh.
Well,
Let's let's have a discussion.
exactly. I mean, what you talk about with your speech therapist is the good ones, and I'm sure this one was, or a good BA is about not just, it's about taking technical concepts and listening to the person talk and figure out how to best communicate that in a language that is going to connect or interact with them, right?
Yeah.
Acronyms or technical language can sometimes distance people if they don't know what it means, particularly for those of us who are so used to using these terms that they are second nature for us. Kind of
Mm,
like the beginner's mind thing. Every time I teach someone who tells me that they hate their voice or they were told they couldn't do this, it's because they've been repeating that story over and over in their head. And what I can help them do is figure out how to transfer that to a language that is useful and can get them to whatever their intention is. I mean, I usually have people tell me first off, what is it that you want to get out of this? Like a stakeholder, what's the reason for, what do
mhm,
you want to find out? And then work backwards. And of course, just they call it create backward design, that kind of a thing. And I
mhm.
found that's pretty useful to just go, and to trust that you can't know everything. I mean, we try. I mean, I like
Right.
to know as much. I want to be prepared, but
But you're right. We've got to give ourselves a little bit of grace because we can't know everything. We can be prepared and we can still get a question we don't know the answer to. And then we can say, I'm not sure what the answer is. We got to get comfortable with that. And that may make us feel a certain way because we've got to admit that. But trust is built in those spaces where people see you as on the same team and that you're human and you're willing to just be a little vulnerable.
and that we might learn something. I'm always excited when people that I work with come up with something that I didn't know about or that connected the dots of what I said in a way that it never occurred to me. And I'm like,
Right.
I want to, that there's a book called Steal Like an Artist. And it's the idea that we borrow things from, like, I listen to you and I learned so much from watching you facilitate and go, oh, okay, these are things that I want in my own style. It doesn't mean that I want to imitate Susan, but if there are aspects, if I can identify them, that's kind of what I'm good at after all these years, is diagnosing how to say it in sort of concise terms,
Hmm.
and help that's helpful when you're working with people who think that they don't know or are intimidated by whatever your title is. They think I've heard the stories about BAs and stakeholders. It's like, oh, they want us, they never answer our calls. And
Right, right. They don't know what I do or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think that is very common. Well, hey, let's see. So we are live today, and I think I added a little banner at one point to ask any questions if anybody had any. Let's see what we've got. I've grabbed a couple of things. Let's see. All right, so we've got Christy. Practice makes all the difference, she says. I've learned I've learned that the hard way. That's anything you want to do well, you got to practice.
it has to be intentional practice, because I remember in my undergrad days when I was at Cleveland Institute of Music, there'd be people who'd spend 4 or 5 hours in a practice room. The time and what you get from it, exercises should come with, okay, here's what I want to get out of this. And being intentional, it could be 5 minutes, if you're thoughtful about it, and you really sort of spend some time being self-aware. So, and I had a graduate student once who said to me, oh, do I have to know what the words mean every single time? Do I have to practice this? And I said, yeah. And what's more, you have to find a way to enjoy that, that
Yeah.
process. I do. I love it. I love the end result, but the sort of the beginning part, the structuring, the figuring out the plan, the thinking about how I'm going to practice it in bites is sometimes frustrating, but almost always enjoyable for me now, but it took me a while to get there.
I mean, you're making me think about what I love about dance. And because like you also practice is an essential part of what we do. I mean, you for years probably do a lot of building techniques. I'm doing lots of small movements because when I put them all together into choreography, I want to do them well. I want to do them without hurting myself. I want to do them in the way that they are functionally intended to move. When I get to the stage of learning choreography, um, for me, now what I'm doing is, yep, I'm going to need a couple of go throughs where I'm just going to get the choreography down. And that for me, that's always 3 times. I just need 3 times, right? And
That
then
seems to be with a key thing is 3 times seems to
yeah,
be for
and
memorization.
then I kinda get it in my muscles, and then I can start to listen to the music. I can start to listen to the words of the music, and I can then begin to put my own imprint on that because I might be doing a move a particular way because that's what my training is, but I might do that move very differently if I'm listening to some Latin music or if I'm doing something to hip hop. The style is very different. And so I see, but you got to be able to love all that stuff in the middle where
And
you're putting it together.
and the thing that you bring up that for example, when I moved to France, I learned that of course, plier means to bend. I would see it on post office, ne pliez pas, do not bend the envelope. But I took classical dance, ballet, and I thought, okay, why do these people study bending? They know how to bend, but it's these small actions that help you be more expressive and communicative with your body. And that's the same thing that's true with voice. We don't have to spend time thinking about how we phonate. We know how to make sound. What we need to spend time doing is directing that sound towards a specific or creative intention. And that's super important to remember, because when you see these listicles on these articles that list the 5 top ways to be a good communicator, they're wonderful tips, but they're not contextualized. And
Right.
each one, so individualizing it for your skill set. And I think a lot of this can be done, each of us, with ourselves. I mean, I think people are, you said this in the beginning, I think people know more about how to communicate, particularly if you listen to somebody talk about someone they've heard.
Hmm.
But the objectivity is what listening to the recordings helps you do. It isn't just learning the skills, but learning to champion that unique vibration that you have in your vocalism that only you have.
Yes. Yeah.
That's my
A-
point.
And that's you're so right. I mean, that's why I think it is. We do need to listen to ourselves, if you can.
If others
Um,
have to, why shouldn't we?
that is true. If nothing you've said today is true, that is the most true thing you've said today. All right, let's see. Okay, here you go.
Oh,
So Vadim gives us a little more to think about. So you might get caught being over self-aware of what and how you say things. People will forget 90% of what you say by the next day. They will not forget what you made them feel. So true. So if you make an impact with your message, nobody will remember how you delivered the message.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
There's truth to that. Um, but if you don't overload with how much you say, like you said, if this is the one thing I'm going to remember that you said today, Elias, um, the feeling part is wonderful, but that comes from the intention, and that comes from clearly communicating. Uh, it isn't about just remembering every single thing you wanted to say, because that's a
Right.
lot, right? And that's helpful to remember. I have this list of things that I wanted to say to you today. Will I say them all? Is it is that really the important thing? The important thing is maybe a couple of things will spark someone's curiosity to ask more questions. And so, I would invite the audience, are, the questions about how you view your own voice. Do you like your sound? Have you listened to yourself? Do you know what you sound like? Do you enjoy it?
Yeah.
Anyone, no one's biting,
Well,
huh?
I guess not. That's a question for you guys. Well, on that note, what I was going to say is probably for those that are watching our live stream today, they will see that down below your title, you have shared your blog. I have gone through. When I see your LinkedIn post, I dive in and take a look. And I was going through a couple recently, and I think what business analysis professionals who find you will notice is that you talk about a lot of things that we think about. And then you talk about them slightly differently. So, highly recommend. There it is for our YouTube um, listeners, watchers. I'm going to drop this over into YouTube. And for the LinkedIn folks, I'll make sure that you get this link, or if you can see it, grab it.
There are two things. The thing that's on there is away from LinkedIn is a blog that I've been doing, weekly insights that I started. I can't believe today will be the 64th. I also do it on Wednesdays. And then I started to notice with LinkedIn that you could create an edition. And I've been duplicating them with the LinkedIn edition, where people can actually subscribe to be notified when a new article drops if they're interested in it. So either way, but even if you see it on Thursday, it's still the same thing that it is on Wednesday. So
Okay.
that's just
Well,
mostly for me.
I mean, some of the topics that you've covered are things like bias, and you talk about tone, you talk about breath, um, and um, and how that can draw the connections between the words. Like it is it is the stuff that we do in communication, but it really takes it to a deeper level, and it gets it away from just the logistics of communication into really being a good, authentic communicator, which is different, right?
Yeah,
I just
it is. It is. I
Yeah.
mean, and lately I've encountered doing work. I'm creating a reflection journal that takes a specific Stoic philosopher, Epictetus, and connects
Yep.
it to voice concepts. The thing I liked about Epictetus is that he was born into a background where he really had to figure stuff out, and his sayings are practical. And one of the ones that I wrote down today to help bolster me to remember these more technical is, don't just speak your training, embody it, live it.
Mm. Mhm.
And that's good, but these are technical ways to make that happen, to think about, we heard this as little children, think before you speak, that concept of taking, it might feel like an hour. You've been on the stage as a theater person, but I remember when people drop a line, and it might only be a second, but for
Mhm.
them it feels like an hour.
Yes. Yes.
That's how pausing is. If you're preparing something for a stakeholder, it's okay to have pauses, because that lets the idea land, and let's give people a chance to speak. Maybe you don't do 90% of what you had to say. Maybe you only do 70, and the other 30% is them, if they choose to. But it's easy to stream. I remember one time we talked, you were like, "Oh, Elias, I'm breathless after talking to you because I get so excited," right? And it can
I
be
know.
an overload, right? I get that with myself. I practice that. I mean,
Yeah.
particularly if I'm excited and passionate about something, that sort of extroversion comes out in that way, where
Mhm.
it wouldn't necessarily in another way. So, yeah.
Yes. Totally agree. All right. Well, you're not going to believe this. We are coming up at the end of our time together. Not forever, just for now.
No, it's wonderful. I appreciate the opportunity, because what was helpful about coming to Copenhagen was seeing that, because often when people hear you're an opera singer, they only think about the performative aspects. Oh, I don't want to sing. These skills could also be good for karaoke.
Yeah.
It's useful. And I think that karaoke has, if people transferred, those who do that, who aren't performers, if they transferred the skills that they're getting from being good at that to something like they might be doing at work, But I was very happy to see when I was there in May that many of your colleagues and the people that you work with found this intrinsically valuable, not just as an external performative, oh, Elias, he's our opera singer, which
Right.
I'm happy to be.
Well, because they can see that it is really practical. And I think because you are so good at putting it into plain language, it's not a bunch of fancy techniques. It's like it's real stuff that people can do that benefits how they communicate. Whether, we talked earlier about, right? It's the same instrument. Maybe sometimes I'm using it to communicate technical things, or maybe sometimes I'm using it to sing. It's the same instrument. And those techniques, if we are intentional and we are self aware and we can employ them, they can help to make us better communicators, whatever our music is.
Exactly. Yeah, every language has its own music. You hit it on the head
Mhm.
when I moved to France. To be curious about how we sound, and that will make us better at listening to others. The more we know about our own communication style, the more the more grace we give to others, especially if they're speaking in a way that maybe we don't agree with, or we find it's confusing to us, but it gives us a chance to do that. And Margaret Harshaw, who I've mentioned quite a lot, was the latest teacher I had. And she spoke like this. This is where I learned it. Lots of people can throw, I'll tell you, in the voice world, they can throw jargon at you. And it's very intimidating, Italian words like passaggio and oppaggio and voce di testa, voce di, um, it can be kind of intimidating, but all of those things can be said in a way that they're our body. We understand
Yeah.
them. We just have to know what we know.
Yes,
I'll leave you with
exactly.
that.
All right. And with that, I want to thank you again. Uh, I feel certain you're going to be hanging around our sphere a little more often. So folks can find you on LinkedIn. They can find you on that blog. Highly recommend. And if you see his name as a keynote or as a speaker in any event you're going to, like, go, because he's gonna take you in a different direction. It's not your usual business analysis talk. So definitely you got to check out Elias.
Well, a big hug from Duluth, Minnesota, where we're starting to get our warm, wet, our cool fall weather. And I wish you a excellent day, and thank you so much for allowing me to come and talk to you. And it's a pleasure. Anyway, it feels like just we're on the phone. It's awesome.
I know, I know. All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you in a minute. Hang around for me.
All right.
All right, and that is the end of our session today. Hopefully, we've got you thinking about your voice and how you can be more intentional with it as you are communicating. When we see you in 2 weeks from today, we're going to be talking about human skills in the tech world. For this, we're going to go completely to the opposite end of the spectrum. And I've got a Microsoft MVP who does a lot of talks about how human skills are essential for that tech work. I hope that you will join us in 2 weeks. Thanks again. Bye bye.